A Body of Doctrinal Divinity by Dr. John Gill, Book 1, Chapter 1, Part 2 of The Being of God, continued. So deeply rooted is a sense of deity in the minds of men. I am sensible that to this it is objected, that there have been, at different times and in different countries, some particular persons who have been reckoned atheists, deniers of the being of God. But some of these men are only deriders of the gods of their country. They mock at them as unworthy of their name, as weak and insufficient to help them, as they reasonably might, just as Elijah mocked Baal and his worshippers. Now, the common people, because they have behaved towards their gods, looked upon them as atheists, as such who did not believe there was any God. Others were so accounted because they excluded the gods from any concern with human affair. They thought they were otherwise employed, and that such things as were below their notice, and not becoming their grandeur and dignity to regard, and had much the same sentiments as some of the Jews had, Ezekiel 9:9, Zephaniah 1:12. But these men were not deniers of the existence of God, only of his providence to the affairs of the world, and others have been rather practical than speculative atheists, as the fool in Psalm 14 verse 1, who not only lives as if there was no God, but wishes in his heart there was none, rather than believe there is none, that so they might take their fill of sin, without being accountable to a superior being. The number of real speculative atheists have been very few, if any. Some have boldly asserted their disbelief in a God, but it is a question whether their hearts and mouths have agreed. At least they have not been able to maintain their unbelief for long without some doubts and fears, and at most this only shows how much the reason of man may be debased and how low it may sink when left to itself. These few instances are only particular exceptions to the general rule, which is not destroyed thereby, being contrary to the common sense of mankind, even as it is no sufficient objection to the definition of man as a rational creature, that there is now and then an idiot born of his race. So not to the general disbelief of deity, that there is now and then an atheist in the world. It is further objected that there have been whole nations in Africa and America who have no notion of deity. But this is what has not been sufficiently proved. It depends upon the testimonies of travellers, and what one affirms, another denies, so that nothing can certainly be concluded from them. I should rather question, says Herbert Lord Cherbury, whether the light of the sun has shone on the remotest regions, than that the knowledge of the Supreme Being is hidden from them. Since the sun is only conspicuous in its own sphere, but the Supreme Being is seen in everything. Diodorus Siculus says, a few of the Ethiopians were of the opinion there was no God, though before he had presented them as the first and most religious of all nations, as attested by all antiquity. The Hottentots about the Cape of Good Hope have been instanced as without any knowledge of deity, and certainly they are a most beastly and brutish people. They can be named, and the most degenerate of human species, and have survived the common instinct of humanity. Yet, according to Mr. Colben's account of them, published some years ago, they appear to have some sense of a supreme being, and of inferior deities. They express a superstitious joy at the new and full moons, and it is said that they pray to a being that dwells above, and offer sacrifice of the best things they have, with eyes lifted up to heaven, and later discoveries of other nations show the contrary to what has been attested of them, which assertions have arose either from want of intimate knowledge of them and familiar acquaintance with them, or from their destitute, wicked and irreligious lives, when by conversing with them it appears that they have a notion of the sun or sky or something or other being a sort of deity. Thus it has been observed of the Greenlanders that they had neither religion nor idolatrous worship, nor so much as any ceremonies to be perceived tending to. Hence the first missionaries entertained a supposition that there was not the least trace to be found among them of any conception of a divine being, especially as they had no word to express him by. But when they came to understand their language better, they found quite the reverse to be true, from the notions they had, through very vague and various concerning the soul and concerning spirits, and also from their anxious solicitude about the state after death. And not only so, but they could plainly gather from a free dialogue that they had with some perfectly wild Greenlanders that their ancestors must have believed a supreme being, and did render him some service, which their posterity neglected, little by little, and further they were removed from the more wise and civilized nations, till at last they lost every just concept of the deity. Yet after all, it is manifest that a faint idea of a divine being lies concealed in the minds of even this people, because they directly assent without any obligation to the doctrine of a God and his attributes. And as to what is concluded from the religious lives of the inhabitants of some nations, we need not be sent to Africa, America, for such atheists as these. We have enough of them in our own nation, and I was just ready to say we are a nation of atheists in this sense, and indeed all men in an unregenerate state, be they Jew or Gentile, or live where they may, they are aioi atheists, as the Apostles calls them, Ephesians 2:12. They are without God in the world, being alienated from the life of God, Ephesians 4:18. Otherwise, there is such a general sense of deity in mankind, and such a natural inclination to religion of some sort or other, though ever so bad, that some have thought that man should rather be defined as a religious rather than rational animal. I take no notice of the holy angels who worship God continually, nor of the devils who believe there is one God and tremble, my argument being only concerned with men.